Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be doing some pivot maintenance on a Yeti SB5c, which has the switch infinity system. Now this system is very similar to the other systems on other Yeti bikes, for instance the Yeti SB4.5c and the Yeti SB6c, and maybe even the SB5c. So the systems are very similar, although some of the hardware may be slightly different. So we're going to go through a maintenance that I do every few months or so. So Yeti recommends that you replace the suspension pivots every year, and that's probably a fair estimate for most people that ride their bike, a few times a week, almost year round. Maybe even more if you live in like wet or grimy conditions. But I'm going on almost a year and a half on the original bearings, and the reason I've been able to do this is this sort of simple tutorial that I'm about to show you. Alright, so typically I start off with a pretty clean bike, so I'll usually do a 10-15 minute bike wash before I do this pivot maintenance. Obviously the first thing I'm going to do is remove the rear wheel. You don't have to remove the chain, but if you're going to clean it anyway, you may want to get it out of the way. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to need to do is remove the shock, and that's pretty simple to do, as you can see here. Alright, so with the shock removed, I'll typically take the rear swing arm and move it up and down. And one thing you'll notice after a few months of riding, even on a new bike, is that the swing arm may feel a little bit notchy. As you move it up, you'll feel a notch before the switch infinity system switches direction. Alright, so the next thing I'll do is I'll remove this little Yeti man cover, and then I'll move over to the non-drive side and remove the two bolts. Next thing to do is to take a 10mm socket and remove the two collet bolts. Now one thing to keep in mind, these bolts are slightly different lengths, so you want to keep track of which one is which. Alright, at this point the rear swing arm can get removed. Now I don't remove the swing arm entirely. What I'll do is I'll swing it up and then tie it using a piece of string, or in this case a USB cable, around the bottom of the seat to get it out of the way. Be careful as you first move the swing arm up to make sure it doesn't get scratched. So there is a little bit of jiggling that needs to happen here. Alright, so the swing arm out of the way, you may want to take the opportunity to get a napkin and just kind of clean things up a little bit that you couldn't get with a normal bike wash. Once that's complete, the next thing to do is to remove the dog bone. And one thing you'll notice on the Switch Infinity system is that none of the bearings are pressed into, like, say, the carbon swing arm, which is nice because typically anytime you press a bearing into carbon, there's always an issue where over time it could creak. So this particular system is really nice. Alright, so at this point I'll give the bearings a couple more spins. In some cases I'll open up or pry off the cover and just sort of inspect it. And a lot of times you may need to sort of repack them or add some more grease into them to make them smooth again. And I typically use rock and roll web grease. It's worked pretty well for me in the past with these sort of suspension bearings. Super tacky, it's white, so the next time you look at it, if they're really dirty, it's very obvious. To do this right, you technically need to take the bearings out and do both sides. I typically don't do that. And doing one side for me seems to work pretty well. Alright, at this point I'll give the bearings a couple more spins. 20 to 30 should just about do it. And then at this point, I'll move on to the switch infinity system and do sort of the exact same thing. I'll kind of spin it with my fingers, see how they feel. In this particular case, they're very, very smooth, and I can feel that there's still quite a bit of grease inside of them. You may want to install or insert another collet bolt just to give them, again, about 10 to 20 revolutions, just to make sure that that grease is moving and that the bearings don't stay in the same location. All right, so at this point, you may want to take the opportunity to grease your switch infinity system. There's a couple tutorials online. I believe it's on Fox's website on how to do this, but I typically just insert my grease gun into the zerk fittings that are on the non-drive side. And I'll squirt just a little bit, not too much, just enough where I can see it kind of oozing out a little bit. And then I'll move the switch infinity system up and down about 10 times or so, and then I'll just sort of wipe off the excess. Very simple process. All right, so at this point, I'm ready to install the dog bone back into the frame. There is a Switch Infinity logo on it, so make sure to install it in the right orientation. I will use a little bit of grease on the bolt. On the screw side, I'll use a couple drops of Loctite. When I tighten this down, I actually use a little bit less torque than what Yeti recommends, because I've noticed if it's too tight, the dog bone gets pretty stiff and it's really difficult to move. So I'll tighten it so that there isn't play, but not tight enough so that the dog bone isn't too stiff. All right, so at this point, you're ready to install the swing arm back on. So one thing to keep in mind is you want a little bit of grease on the collet bolt, but you don't want to put grease on the thread portion. I typically don't put anything on the thread portion. Some people may want to use Loctite, but I've seen that it's really not necessary for this frame. I know with some full suspension bikes, these collet bolts tend to come loose, but I have not seen that be an issue on these bikes at all. All right, at this point, it's time to install the collet bolts. Believe it or not, these actually have a higher torque rating than the collet axles themselves, so make sure to torque these down to 10 Newton meters. Don't forget to install the Yeti Man cover. So now take the swing arm, move it up and down, and see if it feels any different. It should feel a lot smoother as it goes through its travel. If not, you may need to order replacement bearings from Yeti. All right, so really the final step here is to replace the shock. All right, that just about sums up the tutorial. Hope you guys found this useful. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. Make sure to like and subscribe. We'll see you next time. Bye.